Welcome back. In this video I'll be doing an engine cradle on a Honda Accord. So anything from a 1998 to 2002, it's the exact same procedure. Alright, so if you look down there, you see that water? That's coming from the AC, and over time that rots away the engine cradle underneath. So this one's really rotted, and we're gonna go ahead and replace it. Okay, a brand new one is about 1,500 bucks. So what we did was we got one from the junkyard. This was 120 bucks, and we painted it with a paintbrush and Rust-Oleum black paint. So this is what we're putting in right here. And that's what we used to paint that with. Alright, the first thing we're going to do, make sure you take the key out of the lock over here, the ignition cylinder, and lock the steering wheel, because we'll be moving around the power steering, the tie rods and stuff. You don't want to mess up the clock spring inside the steering wheel over there in the column. 10mm nut over there, take the battery off. Take the air cleaner box out. Alright, so this car has a vacuum, hydraulic, computer-controlled motor mount, and the vacuum line is back there. It's this one right there, so take that off. Use a pick to crack it loose, and just pop right out. And that's the bolt to the motor mount over there. I'm gonna spray some of my favorite butter sauce, my personal lubricant on that. It's a 17mm nut on top over there. Put a flex head 3/8 ratchet on it. There you go. And that comes right out. Okay, now we're on the driver's side over here. There's a power steering line bracket right there. It's 10mm. Go ahead and came right out. Okay, we're putting this OTC stinger on here, engine support, to hold the engine up, and this goes on the strut towers over here. You can also make one of these with a 2x4, some pipe, and some chains. So go ahead and put this on here. Alright, so this is how we put it. On the side over here, on the lip of the fender, and we tighten these down, and now we're going to tighten these down on both ends. Okay, so one engine lift point is right there. It's a factory lift point. We'll put a bolt through that, and the other one is over here, right there. So we're going to put this chain and the bolt through there. Okay, so that's in two. I'm going to go ahead and lift this engine up a little bit. That's good for now. Take the wheels off. Those are 19mm lug nuts. Okay, now they're going to take the tie rods off. There's a cotter pin over there. Pop that bitch out. That's a 17mm nut over there. Leave that on there so you can hammer that and whack it out. And that's loose. And it's done. Do the same thing on the other side. Okay, now we're going to take these radius rods off and take this plastic cover off. There's plastic push pins on here. Put the tool in there, yank it out, and do the same with those over there. This one broke, so you might want to get new pieces for these, just in case you break them. Alright, so there's all the plastic rivets are out. Pop this right off. And the whole thing comes right off like that. Alright, now there's a bushing in there and the radius rod, and squirt some butter sauce on that. Same thing on that side. It's 11/16 deep socket we're putting in there. Let's take that off. Jesus Christ. Stuff is rusted to crap. And now pry the bushing out. And do the same thing on the other side. Okay, you see this bolt over here? You gotta take that off. That's a sway bar end link bolt. Now, these bolts tend to turn, when you turn those, it tends to turn the whole thing over here on the other side, and you really can't do much with it. We're just gonna cut it off and call it a day and get new sway bar end links. Yeah, baby. Now you clamp that with a vice grip. And turn the other side. There you go. And that's out. And that's what that looks like. Take this part of the control arm off. There's 17 on both ends. To get that lower control arm off, this nut is actually welded on there, so you don't have to mess with that. Okay, now we're gonna get a pry bar. You could pry that out of there. Be careful when you do that. Make sure the axle doesn't pop out of the transmission. If it does, you just have to put it back in. Not a big deal. Okay, now there's 3 bolts here that bolt the back section of the crossmember to the front section of the crossmember. There's 2 parts of this crossmember. So go ahead and take those off. These are all 17s again. And we did the same thing on the other side. Alright, we have to get the exhaust out, so we're going to spray those bolts with some butter sauce. I love dropping the pipe. These are 14mm nuts. Yeah, baby. Yeah, buddy.
I'll hit the gun.
Now, if those don't come off easily, you're going to have to torch them. Alright, so those 3 nuts are off. Okay, there's 2 bolts for the exhaust hanger bushing. Take those off, those are 14mm. Alright, those are 14mm bolts over there that holds the flex pipe in place. I have a wrench on there, crack that loose. And those are cracked loose. And that's loose. The whole thing is loose. Okay, there's a clip for the O2 sensor. Just pull that off. Alright, now we're going to take the cradle bolts. This back one here, we're going to take out the 17mm bolt, and the one in the front, we're just going to loosen and do the same thing on the other side. And that's the other one right there. Now to get to that, you got to move this control arm over, like we did over there, towards the back of the car, and there's easy access straight from underneath. And now the other side. And we loosen that too. Okay, now underneath the steering column, There's these clips here. You just pop these out and it holds this cover in place where the steering shaft is. There's a 10mm through bolt that goes onto the steering shaft. You gotta take that off. Okay, now we're gonna unbolt the cradle. We're showing you what it looks like. Alright, so we took these two out. And now the front over here, we're gonna loosen these a little bit. And we'll show you up on top what it looks like when we loosen this up. The shaft on top should come off the steering column over there. There we go. And it's off. Now we're going to take the front motor mount bolt off. That's a 7. It's off the shackle. And that's a 17mm bolt also. Now we're going to take the front cradle totally off. We're going to take that other bolt off. Now this whole thing should slide right off. Come off the arms, and that's the whole thing. Take the two 10mm bolts holding the cable in place. Shift the cable in place. And when you do this, make sure you have a jack underneath holding the cradle so all the tension is not on the shifter cable. And we already took two 12mm bolts off this cover. There's one left on top over there, so I'm going to take that one off. And there goes the cover. So this is what it looks like in here. There's a metal plate here, you gotta straighten it out. And that comes right off. The whole thing comes right out. As you can see, the motor mount is slipping off over there. See the bolt that goes up there? Right there. So we're lowering the cradle now. Make sure that comes off. You can put a pry bar in there, wiggle it out. And now the only thing that's holding this in place are the power steering lines that connect to the rack right there. And as you can see here, this came out from inside the car. Disconnect that. Comes right off. Right. There's one more here. You can lower the cradle a little bit to get to this one. And that comes right off too. Okay. And there's one more 10mm bolt over there holding this power steering line in place. Just take that off right there. Okay. And that's off. Alright, now the power steering lines, we're putting crow feet here. That's a 14mm, and the other one is a 17. We'll go ahead and crack that loose. Yeah, baby. And now this one, crack this one loose. Okay. Now everything's disconnected, we just gotta lower the jack. This whole thing drops right out. Disconnected. I gotta go over it. Pick it up, go over the exhaust. And that's everything. And that's what it looks like empty over here. Alright, so this is the reason we're changing this. This is all rotted out here. There's a little flimsy metal that's holding this together right now. And that's where all the water settles from the AC over there. Okay, we're going to take this engine mount off. There's 4 14mm bolts holding this in place. Alright, we're going to take this off. And there's one more here. Okay, now we're going to take the steering rack out. These are all 14mm bolts. Everything here. So we're going to take those off now. And the whole rack could slide out now. And that's in. The torque spec on that is 2 ugga-duggas. Okay, now for the sway bar, we have new bushings here and new end links. So we're just going to take this off and change those, but we're going to do those later. We're going to install it without the sway bar. Okay, now slide in the rack in the new one. A little finagling, but it'll make it. There you go. Home sweet home, baby. Now put the bracket on to hold that in place. One long bolt goes up there, another long bolt on the bottom to the rack, and then smaller bolts onto the cradle. Put the bushing on. Cover to hold the rack on the other side of the cradle, and the doors bolts. This bracket on, long bolt. There's a long bolt, goes in the middle, and 2 smaller bolts on the ends. Okay, torque spec for this is good and tight, or 2 ugga-uggas. And it's in. Put the El Buto on. Stick the rubber on, baby, stick it on. What a nice fit. I like it. Okay, we're gonna put this cradle in. The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna put that steering shaft in the hole, then try to align everything and put 1 bolt in the back of the cradle. And that's the hole it's gotta go into, nice and big. Let's do this. Okay. Over the exhaust. Move these control arms out of the way. Okay. Put 1 bolt in here. Also, try to put the engine mount in the hole in the middle. Okay. Alright, I'm good. Oop. Got it? Yep. Alright, good. There she is. Alright, now put the control arm in. Just like that. Grab the radius rod and pull that out to align the bolt hole to the control arm. And Wiggle it around, baby. And that's good. Alright, we put the other side of the control arm in. If it doesn't go in easily, you could put a big pry tool here and knock it in place. We also put the second bolt in on the cradle. Right here, and on the other side, and they're both loose. We're going to put the power steering lines in and leave the cradle hanging low, and you got to go inside, and as you're pushing the cradle up, you're tightening it up, the bolts. You got to make sure the flat spot aligns with the flat spot on the splines over there on the shaft, so everything goes in nicely. Now we're going to go ahead and put the lines on. Thread in the lines, catch it by hand. You got to wiggle around with one hand. You don't want to cross thread that, because then you're really screwed. And the same thing with the other line. Catch it by hand first couple of threads. You can never cross thread by hand. Remember that. Okay, got it. Got that. Wiggle and jiggle. Try to catch it. Okay. And that one caught too. So go ahead and tighten those two down. Tighten that down. Then once it's snug, then we're going to use the crow feet. Same thing on the other line. And that's good. And that one's on there too. So both lines are good. Alright, now I'm in the car and I have somebody underneath. He's going to bolt up the cradle a little more. And as he's bolting up the cradle, this thing is the shaft is gonna go up inside here. We could put the steering column in it. Remember, there's a flat spot here. There's a flat spot on these splines, and there's a flat spot on this thing here. The flat spot is in here, right there. And if you feel here, there's a flat spot right there. So as he's tightening it down, it's gonna come up.
I'm when you're ready.
Ready. Alright, so it's in. Now I just got to put the through bolt in and tighten that down. Alright, so that's where the flat spot should be. I'll put some red thread locker on this, and when you put this in, make sure it goes in easily up to where it needs to be threaded. So I'm just going to go ahead and thread that and tighten that down now. And you're good. Tighten down the control arms. That's good. Now we put the front cradle in. You grab the radius rods and put them in through the hole over here. Then we have bolts going to go through here. So also align the mount, the motor mount, with the shackle. Put one end in first. Now other end in. Alright, right there. And everything's pretty much aligned there. Okay. Put the bushing in. Alright, there it goes. Alright, bushing's in. And now the washer and the nut, and same thing on the other side. Alright, leave the cradle in the back a little loose. Then when you put this in, everything should wiggle around so you can line everything together. Go ahead, now we're going to put these in. Just like that. Alright, so we're going to tighten these down, these radius bushings down. That's to pull this forward, and remember, everything else is loose now. We're just tightening the radius bushings down, the radius arm bushings. Alright, so all the bolts are pretty much in. Everything is a little loose. The bolts are pretty much all halfway through in, and we're just going to tighten everything down. So go ahead and do that. Alright, I'm not going to show everything that we're doing. Putting everything back in is reversal of removal. And over here, certain things we had to, we had to bend this down so it could meet up with the cradle over here. Same thing on the other side, because this was bent up a little bit. This is easy to bend down. Just put a pry bar and bend it down. The next thing that we did here was when we put this in, you could put a little pry bar in here, right in there where the bushing is, to move the bushing down a little bit to align that, to get that in place. And that's pretty much it. If we have any other issues here, I'll let you guys know, but we're gonna proceed with putting everything back together. The exhaust over here and the shifter cable. It's gonna go back in there. Right back in there. Everything's going in smooth. The exhaust went in, no problem. Gotta pry it over a little bit with a pry bar to line everything. Put the shifter cable in. Make sure you bend the tabs over like we did before when we were taking it out. And I'm just gonna put the cover back on here. Alright, so we put the end links in, put the sway bar in. It's pretty straightforward. And put the O2 sensor in. Clipped it up in there. And I think we're good. We just got to put the tie rods in now. And put new cotter pins in those. Pop the tie rods in. And you're good. And we're good. And we're done with this plastic piece. Now we're putting the nut in on the rear motor mount. And we're good. Take the vacuum line back on. Put this back on. The intake ducting. And you're good. Battery terminal. Fill up the power steering fluid and make sure it's Honda specific. Okay, we fill it up, then we started the car, then suck it in, and fill it up some more. Alright, now I'm turning the steering wheel from lock to lock. We're going to do this about maybe 10 times. And we're going to see what the fluid level is and fill it up again. Alright, we're going to raise the car up, check for any power steering leaks, where the fittings are. The hose is over there. And we're pretty much done. With a nice shiny cradle in here. Thanks for watching, subscribe to my channel, like me, share me, follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Clowny1969. Sayonara.